6, 8, 10, she counted as she scanned the house numbers along the row. 14. Where's 12? She briefly scanned back to where 12 should have been before looking up and down the street. Grimwald Place. How she had found her way there she did not know, but she knew she had to find it in London's multitudinous streets. She looked back at the door as large raindrops, the kind that are the prelude to a heavy downfall, began to drip around her. Last time she had a letter. This time she just hoped that it would work. In her mind she imagined the letter, picturing it as clear as if it were in her hand now. Please arrive at 12 Grimwald Place, London, on 15th July, at 10:30 p.m. It was all she had, a hope that if someone were home they could perhaps hear her thoughts. Nothing. She sighed and sat on the steps that purported to be shared between numbers 10 and 14, too tired even to smile politely at the man and woman who were walking their dog in the small square green which was the central focus of Grimwald Place, as the thoughts that weren't hers compelled her to contact the people beyond the door. The person beyond the door of number 12, the door which didn't exist. Who were these people? She knew, but at the same time did not. Right here, right now, sitting on the steps becoming wet with the rain, a few more precious memories were washed onto the shore of her mind as they had done over the last few days. She turned and looked over her shoulder before clambering to her feet and scanned the number. Number 12. The door hadn't been there when she'd sat down, and this time, in an old-fashioned script, number 12 was clearly visible, and vague half-thoughts began to jump through her mind, like a dream, or a dream of a dream. A further deluge of rain drenched her as she pushed her feet down onto the wide stone steps outside the door. She knew who was going to be the dot. She could remember Sirius Black. She remembered Grimwald Place and what he had tried to do with her there. Raising her fist, Cecilia Frobisher knocked heavily on the grime-black door. Yes, she knew him. And she also knew how she could help him. Besides, what else did she have? 88,888,888. Sirius Black opened his front door. It was unusual for anyone to be calling nowadays. The order generally used the pirated flu network that the Ministry had yet to discover, but it must have been one of them. Dumbledore had only ever given the password to the order. Unlatching 3 of the door fastenings before pulling on the handle, he looked upon the face of a ghost becoming saturated by the monsoon-like downpour. Cecilia Frobisher stood on his doorstep looking lost and bedraggled like a helpless kitten. Sirius. Her voice was weak but tinged with hope. I didn't know what else to do. Cecilia. Gobsmacked was not a strong enough word to describe how he felt at that precise moment. We thought you were supposed to be. She stared back at him, wide-eyed, and Sirius looked her up and down as she became even more drenched before pulling her in by the elbow and pushing the door shut behind her. Even out of the rain she exuded moisture, most of which was collecting as puddles and soaking into the elderly blue Wilton carpet that lined number 12's hallway. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know how I got here. Cecilia continued, wondering why Sirius Black, the usually unflappable and presumptuous wizard, looked so astounded. My memory's a bit addled. I remember. She trailed off, her temples pounding underneath her disheveled hair. It is you. Cecilia? Sirius asked, looking at her face carefully before shaking her by the arms, and she stared back at him with a doleful look. I need to know it's you. Why? We thought you were dead. Cecilia reached for her temples. At some stage over the past few days she thought she had been living and breathing, yes, but with no recollection of anything at all for some time. The nurses had told her she had been in hospital for 3 days, and she had since tried to figure out exactly what had happened. A doctor had visited her in Greater Whinging General claimed it to be, predictably, amnesia probably caused by a blow to the head, he had said, but he was far from able to explain the absence of such a blow. She was, to all intents and purposes, physically fine. Except that she couldn't remember anything and felt upset, miserable and distressed. Felt like I was. She looked at Sirius. I remember some things, she said earnestly. I remembered the letter I received from Mr. White. I remembered it word for word. It was the only address I could remember. And I know you, Sirius, at least I think I do. Cecilia looked down at the sodden carpet. I didn't know where else to go. Things seemed muddled. But I need you to take me back to where I was working. I need to know it's you, really you, said Sirius, still holding on to her arms. Tell me what you remember. Cecilia closed her eyes. Jumbles. Lots of memories that seemed like a tangle of wires which had somehow become crossed and chaotic. Flashes of memories came and went, but she had little or no context of how they fitted into her life. I don't know where or how it's all very vague. Where did Snape take you? Sirius continued to hold her and watched her as she thought. Snape. She shook her head. And then the image of a street filled with detached brick houses hovered into view. Privet Drive, she replied. Privet Drive. Not Grimmauld Place. I thought he was taking me here, but instead he took me there. Sirius was still staring at her strangely, and Cecilia frowned as her plan, glorious in its detail upon the backdrop of an impoverished mind, began to dwell in her consciousness. That's all I remember. I need to know it's you, he repeated, his hands becoming slippery on her upper arms as the water from Cecilia's clothing began to drip over his hands. What were you wearing when you came to the ball at Christmas? What? Both Mole and Wizard were staring at one another intently. Tell me what you were. A silver and blue fay dress, replied Cecilia quickly as she described the mental image that had suddenly appeared. And you were wearing your father's dress robes. She could tell from his expression she had surprised him, and he nodded slowly. She tried to focus on Sirius's face as her mind began to make connections at lightning speed. What did I give you on the morning of your birthday? Cecilia forced herself to keep herself composed as emotional, hurtful things rushed into her hitherto peaceful mind. Some of your hair, she replied, feeling her face glow red, and she looked at the carpet again. Remus. Harry. Snape. Mrs. Dursley. Dumbledore. It was coming back to her in chunks, though not very nice ones. She closed her eyes, but Sirius shook her until she opened them again. What did Moony give you on the night of the ball? Sirius persisted, his hands tightening around her triceps. Cecilia felt herself blush again at the possible answers to this question. A brooch, of his grandmother's. Cecilia snapped back, frowning in frustration. Sirius, please, she pleaded. I'm not myself. You asking me these questions. Can't we just go back to Hogwarts? Or back to the cottage? Instead of letting go of her, Sirius brusquely escorted her further inside number 12's hall. Put that out of your mind, he growled, flicking his hand towards the open doorway that Cecilia was even now realizing led to the living room. I don't suppose you've forgotten about magic? He added with a hint of grudging as she watched wide-eyed as a copy of the Daily Prophet sailed its way into the hall and into Sirius's hand. Cecilia's mind remembered the newspaper at the Dursleys' house and the one at the Natural History Museum, where her mind had sent her off to that afternoon, and a pair of twins fleeted across her mind. Fred and George, it had to be them. In amongst all of this they had realized how cut off she would be feeling and sent her encouragement. She'd had a lot to thank them for. This prompted Sirius sharply, and he let go of her left arm and pointed towards the headline on the day before yesterday's Prophet, and Cecilia left the thought of what she had been doing that afternoon and read the words, her mouth falling agog. Famous mole scientist sought by Ministry in persecution campaign murdered. Ministry claims security breach in defense of using Dementors. Ignoring Sirius's expression, she read on. Cecilia Frobisher, the mole woman who discovered the so-called universal link, was desoiled yesterday in Little Whinging by two Dementors. They got that wrong then, didn't they? Cecilia's attempt at a quip fell on deaf ears and she continued to read. The Ministry was alerted to Mrs. Frobisher's presence in Surrey by a pupil at Hogwarts School, who chanced upon her in the home of a Mole family. The Ministry claims that, as a high-security case, Mrs. Frobisher had caused unacceptable breach of defence that endangered both moles and wizards, and as such had no option but to dispatch Mrs. Frobisher as humanely as possible. Several high-ranking ministers are said to be outraged at the decision and are calling for an investigation into the incident. However, Mrs. Frobisher's body was not recovered, making a full inquiry impossible for the foreseeable future. Cecilia looked at Sirius, whose face was firm and unyielding, and she tried to recall what it had been like to face those Dementors. Terrifying, yes. Misery-inducing, certainly. But the last thing she remembered had been Petunia Dursley's face over the shoulder outline of the second Dementor, as a strange feeling not unlike pins and needles had overcome her and she had passed out, as if the hideous creature had been systematically emptying her body of any thoughts and feelings. She had awoken in hospital with three separate things in her mind. At the time she did not know that they were connected. Sirius Black. A letter containing the details of her engagement in employment and the address to which she must attend. The answer to the question which she and a colleague of unknown identity had been pursuing for several months. And then that morning Cecilia had remembered something else. Like a bright shiny gem on a shore of stones, as she leafed through a magazine that one of the nurses had brought to her after encouraging her, after showering, to dress in her clothes which had been laundered. She discharged herself from hospital and caught a train to London with some money she had been given that was apparently on her when she was brought in, and then a bus to the Natural History Museum. Cecilia had sat there for several hours waiting to see if more of her memory would return before asking the information clerk kindly how she would go about finding out where a street in London might be. The clerk had smiled kindly at her before directing her to the local library around the corner. Remus! Cecilia exclaimed as her fiancé's face appeared in her mind. He was always there. Can I speak to him? Or, can you take me home? Or to Hogwarts? She felt her heart sink as Sirius dropped the newspaper onto the floor, took her by the arms again and shook his head. But I need to tell him I'm alive. If he's read The Prophet. She tried to push past Sirius and look into the living room. Can you tell him? Yes, when my visiting pass for Azkaban arrives. What? Cecilia shook her arms free and balled up her fists, placing them on her hips insistently. He's been arrested, explained Sirius. He's in Azkaban. What for? For aiding and abetting a reciprocator. For murders. And Lucius Malfoy claimed he bit him, so, as a suspected werewolf, they've put him in Azkaban with any other werewolves that turned nasty during interview. The bloody fool Malfoy thought it would be okay to question him during a full moon. And you let this all happen? Through her disheveled appearance Cecilia gave Sirius a withering stare. We tried to stop it, Sirius replied defensively. Moony insisted he wanted to go back to the cottage after you'd been taken off by Snape. He got most upset. We knew the Ministry was coming to take him in, but by the time Dumbledore got there they'd overpowered us and it was too late. He went with them without fuss. Cecilia looked away, and fixed her eyes onto the blue hall carpet, and she felt her knees sag as the strength to hold her upright rushed away. Remus thinks I'm dead. And he's locked up in Azkaban for being a werewolf. For murders. She looked at Sirius in horror, begging him silently to take it back. Murders he didn't commit, Sirius replied softly, but he can't prove to because he was with me in the Forbidden Forest being a werewolf, and if I tell them that they will have him for being werewolf. But they know he's a werewolf. Sirius sighed and looked at her solemnly. Those who the Ministry believe to be a threat, even without evidence, have been arrested and put into Azkaban. They originally claimed he was breaking the werewolf code. Without Malfoy they would have sent him there anyway. They can't do that. They can if they think it's a threat to the wizarding community, which is why they were looking for you. But Dumbledore is there at the Wizengamot now fighting for their release. What's this? He looked down at the piece of folded paper which Cecilia was holding out to him, and Sirius went to take it. She closed her hand tightly round for a moment before letting go. It's my theory. Not Harry's potion. It's the link to his lycanthropy. I know why the moon affects him and I know how to cure him. But it's all for nothing. Cecilia concluded disconsolately, and she grabbed it off him, stuffing it into her pocket. Just a stupid mess. Sirius said nothing as he watched Cecilia Frobisher hang her head before pulling her towards him and letting her sob into his chest. Look, you need a clean-up, Sirius said eventually as Cecilia's racking sobs began to wane, and she looked over her shoulder at the door to the living room through which she had stepped with Snape at the Yule Ball, and with Tonks the year before when she'd taken Cecilia to Diagon. She took a move towards the door, but Sirius barred her way, stepping in front of her and, whipping out a wand, he flicked it in her direction. Cecilia's mouth formed an O of astonishment as she turned from Bag Lady to Presentable Polly, and she looked back at Sirius before nodding awkwardly. It was just a pity that he had not been able to fix the cuts and bruises from her ordeal 4 days before. Don't look at me like that, said Cecilia with a hint of self-consciousness. I'm not that bad. You are, Sirius thought. Look at your face, battered and bruised. But he said nothing and waited for her to speak again. There were 3 things which I remembered this morning when I left hospital, said Cecilia slowly. There was this address, there was you, and there was. She trailed off, wondering how it was that the hypothesis had come about. When you visited me at the cottage and told me about your brother and Horcruxes, she continued, looking at Sirius carefully. A flicker of recognition passed over his face. But that was just me being silly, he laughed dismissively. You look much better now, he added, looked her up and down, approving the sight he saw. No, Sirius, no, Cecilia protested. She took a step towards him and stood inches from Sirius Black, raising a now clean hand to his mouth. It was an apostrophe T. You believe it? SHH, he said to the top of her head as he embraced Cecilia again. You need to rest. You're right, he conceded. I do believe it. Look, no one's here. Unusual, I know, but the rest of the order will be here soon. There's a plan in the offing that's going to happen in the early hours of the morning. Can you tell me what's been happening, Sirius? Asked Cecilia, her voice muffled against his robe. Dumbledore left Hogwarts. He has put the plan into place and we must carry it through. The rest of them don't want to suddenly realize you are here. If you want to carry on with the plan, the only place I can put you for safety is my study. No one comes up there. Sirius shook his head as Cecilia prized herself from him. The most overriding thing at the moment is what Voldemort is planning. If the plan ends up at the Ministry, then we will have to fight him there. Severus thinks he has the potion right now. Cecilia smiled and waited for Sirius to return it. Come on, and then you can tell me all about your ideas about Regulus and the Horcrux. Cecilia followed Sirius through the deserted living room towards the staircase, and she looked around as she went. The Yule Ball was the last time she had been here, at Grimmauld Place. It seemed like a lifetime ago when the Order had been there and she had been able to think of no one else but Remus. She looked past Sirius and began to climb the stairs too, recalling how the last time the 2 of them had been there he had been chasing her down, intent on destroying her work and, through Kreacher, her. All that time, all those events, and now Remus was imprisoned and the wizarding world believed her to be dead. 2 flights of familiar stairs later and Cecilia was standing outside the study that Sirius begrudgingly called his own and, when he was feeling resentful, called his father's, and the wizard put his hand on the handle. Sirius, said Cecilia softly. You believe what you told me, didn't you? You're not just humoring me. I believe it, said Sirius, his voice taking on a rough edge. It's as I said to you at the cottage. Something about my brother and his capture just doesn't sit right. He was taken off by the ministry and his memories stored. But your idea about science Sirius, are you up there? Cecilia jerked her head towards the familiar voice and something inside her made her want to call out. Molly, said Sirius quickly, pushing open the study door. Look, if they know you're here then the plan won't go ahead tonight. Snape'll want you to look at the potion and it'll all get delayed. It has to be tonight. Tomorrow morning, otherwise Dumbledore's plan won't work. Do you understand? Cecilia nodded dumbly. The plan had to come off. She had to see Remus again and the ministry would have no choice but to let him and the other werewolves out of Azkaban when there was no more threat to them from Voldemort. No one will come in here, he added. Don't leave. She shook her head as Sirius closed the door behind him and they both stood in the study looking at one another. I have to ask. I need to know. How did you escape? Cecilia swallowed. She knew Sirius would ask her that question even before she had boarded the double-decker bus that had brought her out to the London suburb in which Grimmauld Place was situated. She shook her head. I don't know. The last thing I remember were the Dementors pressing down on me and then the stripy plastic curtain in hospital. But, Cecilia stared at Sirius before looking around the study. There was another witch when I was out on the street. She's in the order. I've met her before, but if it's her she's not a witch. Why were you on the street? Mrs. Dursley pushed me out and there was some confusion. Cecilia was looking up, past Sirius and at the high thin shelf that skirted the room as the memories returned to her mind sharply and in pieces. Petunia Dursley? Asked Sirius doubtfully and Cecilia looked at him and nodded. Yes. She said she knew you. Yes. I helped her out of a tricky situation once. So that's where you were, he mused. There was long pause as Sirius stared at her. Cecilia was about to ask what he was staring at, but Sirius walked over to the desk and handed her the parchment and a quill and ink case that was on the desk. If you're serious about unraveling it all. He watched her examine the objects that he had given her. To help you think. I will be back as soon as I can. Oh, and you might need these. Sirius crossed to the bureau that stood to the right of the door and pulled open the front hinged drawer, extracting the bundle of semi-recognizable paper. Cecilia put down the parchment and quill and took from him the DNA traces that she had originally run when she had visited Nick Smith at home. There's more than just your originals, explained Sirius. They were left here for safekeeping, but I think the real reason is Snape. He's stuck. I thought you said that he'd done it? Asked Cecilia, recalling their earlier conversation, but Sirius shook his head. He thinks he has, but he's stuck, I'm sure about it. Could you just check to see what you think? I can then give him your musings. A message from beyond the grave, said Cecilia darkly. I'll take a look, but to be honest it looks obvious to me, so I know it'll be obvious to Severus. She looked at the traces and the corresponding parchment, wrapped up in the center. Actually, he's made some pretty wild assumptions about a couple of things. She looked at Sirius. I'd be better off investigating what you told me about your brother, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do whatever you need. I need time to work on it. She looked around the study before realizing that Sirius was looking her up and down again as if she were a ghost. I'm real, she said eventually. I'm not dead. And you are quite well? Cecilia nodded as memories, like sparks, exploded in her mind. Thank Merlin you're safe, he said, staring at her before turning, opening the door and striding through it. Cecilia stared at the closing door, wondering about what she'd just heard. Or rather, what had appeared in her mind. Or rather, a feeling. It had gone as quickly as it had come, making her shiver, and its swift departure made her wonder whether she had actually imagined it. An advancing headache made her wrinkle her forehead in discomfort and, As she put aside her confusing and conflicting emotions, Cecilia began what she was expert at, being useful. 88,888,888. Another letter. Again it was addressed to Severus Snape, and again it had been sent from the same person as last time. There was one difference though, and that was the address. Snape held the envelope low in his lap and read over the address again. Petunia Dursley had sent the letter to Spinner's End. She wanted to help, she had written. She was horrified at the events that had happened on her own doorstep, and she believed that Cecilia Frobisher's body had been taken by the Mole emergency services. Snape read the letter again and thought back to a time long past. Petunia Evans was not the sort of woman who let go her stubbornness easily. She had clearly swallowed her pride to write to him, although her words were staccato and factual with little feeling or flowing. But it was what Petunia had sent with the letter which interested Severus Snape more. She had sent him something of which he knew he would not be in possession had Cecilia Frobisher never been traced to Lupin's cottage, or if Dumbledore had not arranged for her to be hidden at Privet Drive, or even if she had not been killed by the Dementors. These items were personal, things which he knew Cecilia, were she to be alive now, would not have shown him. Leaning forward in his chair, Severus Snape laid out the notes, written in rather untidy scrawl with additions and crossings out dotted around, and looked at them. Not looked at them as in read them, rather, examined their form and shape. This was the last thing Cecilia had written, the last piece of research she had done. Petunia Dursley said as much in her curt, clipped style. They were enough to help him finish Harry's potion or make the one for Lupin. It would be enough, Snape was sure of it. But only one. Screwing up his fist and cursing silently to himself at the unjust situation he was in, Petunia Dursley's letter within it before flinging it into the fireplace and, reaching for his wand, conjured a blaze before the paper reached it. Then he turned back to Cecilia's notes and read them, this time taking in their content again. Uncharacteristically absorbed in the work, he did not notice the appearance of a figure in the doorway, and it was only when Tabitha Penright knocked politely on the thick oak door that Severus Snape realized that the Mole Studies teacher had been staring at him and what he was doing. "Professor Snape," began Tabitha. "You seem quite absorbed there." She was determined not to move or jump when Snape gave her a withering stare, as she knew he would. "Indeed," he intoned. "As you can see. Dolores sent me to find out whether the information in the package that you brought with you to the castle this morning contained knowledge about the potion you are making for Harry Potter, or about the Universal Link." Tabitha's change of tactics seemed to work for Snape. Rather than barring her way or cutting her down with barbs, leaned back in the chair and gestured, open-palmed, towards the writing in front of him. "Be my guest," he invited. "If you can make anything of them, you are more than welcome. They are of no use to me now Cecilia Frobisher is dead." Tabitha shot him a wary look before making a move on the sheaves of paper on his desk. At long last they were what she had been searching for, what she had paid penance for through hours of teaching ungrateful brats and assigned to office duties. Umbridge hadn't sent her, of course, but Tabitha had seen Snape with the large enveloped letter incautiously secreted under his robe as he climbed the stairs in front of the Great Hall, and had taken her chances that she would be able to procure something which may win her a chance to return to the ministry. When she had arrived it had been wearing, tiresome, and something she had readied herself to get on with. Now she had procured Dementors, shared more than she'd cared to with Snape regarding the Department of Mysteries, and witnessed the death of a mole. Tabitha was more than ready to throw the whole thing in, and this gave her uncharacteristic daring. Reaching towards them, her hand was stayed as Snape put his own round Tabitha's wrist. She looked at him in alarm as he leaned forward and glared at her. "You do realize that you're in it as much as I when you read these," he snarled. "No longer will you be Umbridge's pet poodle bowing to her every whim and desire. You will have knowledge brought into being by someone whose intelligence is vastly superior to your own and who gave her life for this. Once you read this you will be no more able to resist its conclusions than dandelion clocks can the wind. Cecilia Frobisher is gone, replied Tabitha curtly as the horrifying image of the woman being attacked by the Dementors she'd coordinated chose that moment to invade her mind again. And that is due to nothing other than her interference in wizard affairs. Her firm tone was not mirrored by her actions though, for, as soon as Snape loosened his hold, Tabitha withdrew her hand. "Professor Penright, why are you here? Surely you knew what you must have been taking on by coming back to Hogwarts. Surely your days here yourself told you that this was no mean feat." Tabitha shot him a steely stare before bowing her head. She had done it because she had been scared of Dolores Umbridge, that the Undersecretary would take her from her job. What a price she had paid for it, teaching here with brazen, undisciplined children. Abiding comments about her inabilities, shunted from one secretarial, unskilled job to the other in the ministry. "You didn't come to find me for these," intoned Snape, stepping uncomfortably close to Tabitha and lowering his face slowly towards hers. "You came to show me something." Tabitha mutely shook her head. "Or tell me," he added. "The veil," she replied as the proximity of Severus Snape became too much to stand. "I have to get back. If you have anything to tell me that I can give to Umbridge I'll be gone. I won't be here and I'll be back in the ministry and you'll be able to mourn the desolement of Mrs. Frobisher privately." It was more than just a guess. Fleeting and swift, Snape's mind was undefended for a mere second, but it was enough for Tabitha, her own diminished ability clicking into action, to discern. "Umbridge has a plan," she continued, concealing her satisfaction at the expense of her boss's secret. "She is hoping that now Dumbledore has gone someone will make a move that will betray him." Tabitha looked up earnestly at Snape, who snorted and folded his arms doubtfully. "You don't believe me? Why do you think that so many of the ministry's besters are here, tearing the school apart?" Tabitha realized her voice had gone thin and reedy as incredulity overtook persuasion, and she was trying to understand why he couldn't see the sky was blue, or the grass was green. "They've found nothing, by the way, nothing that they think is important at any rate. Shouldn't you be with them, seeing as they are from the ministry?" Tabitha watched his lip curl in mocking her dogged loyalty that she had displayed when he and Sturgis had appeared at her office door. "Perhaps I should," she conceded defensively. "Perhaps I should do a lot of things. Perhaps I should inform Umbridge that she had been looking in the wrong place and she should allow the Aurors to investigate the contents of some of the potions in your classroom." Tabitha looked back into the potions classroom, wherein several cauldrons in various stages of manufacture were sitting innocuously. "I know for a fact that these are not in the curriculum." Tabitha took a step towards the door and made to walk back down the steps, but a swish brought her attention back to the room's occupier. Snape was holding his wand toward her, as if to attack. "Stop, Severus," she said warningly, grabbing her own. "I may not be as powerful as many, but I still know some spells." An age passed during which Tabitha wondered whether they would be at stalemate forever, neither one trusting the other. Just when she was about to drop her own and concede defeat, however, Snape marched past Tabitha, down the steps of the office and into the classroom. Tabitha followed, intrigued, and she watched the wizard march towards the shelves to the right of the steps on the longest wall, looking along the spines of a few books before extracting a slim volume. He paced back towards Tabitha and handed her the book. She looked down at the title. Magic and Moles. Magic and Moles? Tabitha read before flicking through a few pages at the articles therein and recalling the time, that summer before leaving for Hogwarts, when she had been sent her own copy of the book. Before she had thrown it into a fire in frustration at Christmas that year. "You wish to unravel the secrets of the Universal Link." Snape's words were a statement, not a question, and Tabitha found herself shaking a little as her hand closed over the treacherous tome. "You have mysterious mythology," he continued, looking intently at her. "A lesser woman than you, magically speaking, started with just these. I suggest that you use them to derive the connection yourself and stop wasting my time." He pushed past her and marched back up the steps into his office. "What? Wait!" called Tabitha after him before following him up the steps. "Snape, what are you doing?" From his position in the tall, black chair, Snape looked at her, and then at the book. "You have a misplaced loyalty to the Ministry because they accept your limited abilities. You no more want to assist them than you want to assist the Dark Lord." He glanced at the book, clasped tightly in Tabitha's grasp. "You no more would now, I confide." "That's where you're wrong," thought Tabitha grimly. "You wouldn't believe what I have done in the name of the Ministry." Instead she nodded deferentially, feeling an inner glow of humiliation. "You're right, Snape," she confirmed, nodding slowly. "Whatever is planned, I do not want to stand in the way of anything." "It is nearly perfected, Severus," Snape replied. "It will not be long before you are back in your department solving your mysteries again. All this will be over." Despite everything, Tabitha felt herself express a brief smile. "Yes," repeated Snape, getting to his feet. "This will finish him. You are right to trust us as Mrs. Frobisher did." 10 minutes later, Tabitha replayed the mental image that Snape's parting words had evoked, and she recalled the fateful day when she had set loose Dementors on the wizard world's most wanted person. A few students strode past her as she stood on her watch that Umbridge had decreed she serve outside the Gryffindor common room because she had come up with nothing of worth for her, sniggering in veiled contempt amongst themselves. Tabitha ignored them and stared back at the portrait of an elderly wizard noble whose portrait hung directly opposite where she was standing. She was there for the duration, that she knew. She hadn't dared ask for qualification of the time she must serve from Dolores Umbridge. A blush of shame began to play on her pale features, making a mockery of the whispered insult which the Ravenclaw students had just whispered under their breath, not because of the pigmented wizard's coquettish waving from his frame every so often, but because what Snape had said. She was a freak, although he had not chosen that moment to use that particular word to describe her. She fell between the cracks. She fitted into neither world. He had not actually said it, Tabitha reminded herself, but a further chink in his mind had allowed her so see. Strangely, it was not his thoughts in themselves that Tabitha was concerned with. The image of Snape at the Department of Mysteries appeared in her mind, and she identified that moment as being the one where she first had doubts about the Ministry. Before that she had unquestioning faith. But what had upset her was that she beginning to suspect that what Severus Snape actually thought was true. Harry Potter was one of those students who slipped past Tabitha, giving her a contemptuous look. This was not, in fact, his intention. Indeed, his expression was oblivious to him as he concentrated on what he was going to say to the person he intended to meet. Indeed, Harry found the person in not too short a time in exactly the same place that Tabitha Benright had found him an hour before. On finding Severus Snape, a small but intense exchange took place whereby both older and younger Wizard A asserted their loyalty to I, Dumbledore, 2, the Order 3, Cecilia Frobisher, B, both expressed regret at her demise, C, both reiterated their position with respect to the potion, and D, revealed something to each other that the other was totally unaware. By the time Harry was walking back up the teaching corridor and back towards the common room, both had one position about the near future reinforced and, crucially, a strongly held belief completely overturned. 88,888,888. Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room looking down at his arm and feeling the prickly sensation of his scar hurting. Sitting back down on the settee, he recalled what had resulted from his conversation with Snape. He had made it to supper, and had slipped next to Ron just as Umbridge began her nightly speech. Their new headmistress had begun the tradition upon the departure of her predecessor and had gone from lauding the students' honesty and trusting that they would come to give her the required information about several suspected plots against the ministry, pausing briefly at various stages of annoyance and disappointment that not one student had been to speak to her, despite her promise of confidence before beginning each dinner with a reading from several ministers' election-winning speeches designed, Seamus observed dryly, to bore them to death. Harry had returned to the common room having been taken aside following dessert by Professor McGonagall, who had been charged with the inauspicious task of telling him that he'd been barred from Quidditch due to his stubbornness in revealing what he knew about Dumbledore. "But I don't know anything about Dumbledore," Harry had insisted, his pleas falling on deaf ears. "There's nothing for me to tell Umbridge." The McGonagall had raised her eyes doubtfully but had said nothing more. He was still smarting from this and his argument for Snape as he watched the flames in the grate. The evening was warm and light, a breeze dancing at the window which would otherwise have elicited feelings of carefree abandon, but for Harry the ambience felt treacherous and duplicitous. "I can't believe they're making us go to lessons still." Behind him Ron's voice permeated his solemn thoughts and he turned to look at his best friend. Ron spotted Harry and threw himself onto the settee next to him, shortly followed by Hermione. "I can't believe that Dumbledore's been replaced by that old witch," remarked Harry, smiling in acknowledgement at Hermione. She smiled back and took Ron's hand. "Yes, Umbridge is a witch," said Ron conversationally. "But I know what you mean. Why did Dumbledore just go like that and let her in?" continued Harry darkly, glaring at the coals in the hearth. "Perhaps she didn't have a choice, Harry?" asked Hermione gently. She swallowed quickly when she caught his expression and expected him to get angry with her. Instead he nodded a little. "Fred and George have more than earned their keep with the practical jokes," commented Ron. "They would have got caught with the overbred blast-ended screts in the ornamental suits of armor outside Dumbledore's office, but Shacklebolt found them and disapparated them before they went off. Apparently they made a big splash in Ullswater. He just stood aside. That's what I can't get over." Harry looked between his two friends, hoping that upon their faces the answers he was seeking would be made plain. "And Professor Penright's gone." "What? From outside?" Ron nodded. "Good," declared Harry. "I can't believe how useless she is." All three fell silent, contemplating the failures of their moral studies teacher. Eventually Hermione leaned forward and looked at Harry, her face a picture of circumspectness. "There's a plan, isn't there? Something he's up to?" Harry said nothing. His scar had been causing him to have vivid visions, or memory slides, if Sirius were to be trusted. His scar had ached when he had seen what Snape had in his mind, just as it ached now. Then it was Mrs. Frobisher. This time it seemed Snape did care about something other than himself. "I think there's going to be something happening soon," he said distantly. "What Dumbledore said?" Harry's voice trailed off and he realized his friends were poised expectantly on the edge of the settee. "Something," Harry repeated. "But what?" "I can't afford to wait to find out. I have to work it out before the something happens." Corrected Hermione quietly. "And it'll be something good," she continued, leaning forward as more Gryffindors entered the common room. "Listen, I overheard Snape tell the McGonagall that the last potion that Mrs. Frobisher made was exactly right." "Was that before or after she told me I was off the Quidditch team?" asked Harry bitterly. Ron gave him a sympathetic look. "Harry, you're not listening." She leaned across Ron and lowered her voice. "I wonder if Dumbledore knows about this." A babble of noise behind them caused all three of them to look over the back of the settee. "Look, it's not private here," Hermione whispered. A few minutes later they were sitting on the cold stone of the Gryffindor Tower, the door locked by at least 3 different spells. "I wonder if Dumbledore's been told of this," Hermione wondered aloud again as the last rays of the summer's evening became trapped in the tower with the three friends. Just think. If Voldemort had delayed his return by a couple of months, you could have taken that one and defeated him straight away. Yes, I would really like to have faced Voldemort with no powers and gone about cursing him with an unforgivable curse, Hermione. I'm not looking forward to this, that's all I'm saying, he conceded at his friend's hurt expression. You did before, commented Ron evenly. How's this time going to be any different? Harry said nothing. He didn't know why he had taken the potion last time, only that Snape and then Mrs. Frobisher had done it, and also he had become so accustomed to the fact he was supposed to take it, it made sense at the time to do so. He's growing stronger. Voldemort. Harry looked past his friends and towards the tower's slatted windows. Are you certain? How do you know? I just do. Harry looked earnestly at his friends. And it's got something to do with the Department of Mysteries. I don't think that Pasty Penwright was here by accident. Huh? He exhaled, frustrated. I'm on my way to knowing. I just need to dash. We can't do anything. You mustn't, Harry, she added when he glared at her sharply. No doubt the Order has something planned around your appearance whenever Voldemort shows up again. You promised to let us help you. You shouldn't leave, she added insistently. Harry said nothing for a few minutes. He wanted to point out to Hermione that it was a bit rich her saying that, when she had agreed with Mrs. Frobisher to make a variant of Polyjuice potion and giving it to her daughter Ron, proposing marriage to Hermione, something that neither of them knew that he knew about. When the breeze was in the air, anything seems like a good idea at the time. This time though, Dumbledore wasn't here. Even if the ex-headmaster of Hogwarts said that Hogwarts was the safest place for him, as he had done when he had shared the knowledge of the prophecy with him, all Harry knew was that if he was to believe anything, he believed that Voldemort was going to reappear at the Department of Mysteries. His latest memory slide had confirmed it for him. When the time was right, he would leave to join the Order and fight. You don't have to leave, said Ron eventually when Harry had not replied. Their eyes met in mutual friendship, mates since the age of 11, and Ron had opened the sliding glass panel on the first-class carriage in which Harry was sitting. He does, said Hermione, sighing deeply as she extracted a letter from her pocket and handing it to Harry. The last letter I received from Mrs. Frobisher. I might have corresponded with her, but so did she, and she was the one in hiding. She obviously thought the risk was worth taking. More science, said Harry, reading the information contained within the letter. The panic in Hermione's voice and Ron's enclosure of her hands in his passing him by. I'm okay at it, but, he looked back to Hermione. You're good at magic, very good, Hermione reminded him, glancing at Ron. Yes, but dash. Magic and science are the same thing, Hermione explained. It's two different ways of looking at the same thing. There are certain things we can't do as wizards. Spare us the lecture, said Ron, distractedly. Get a move on, Hermione, or we'll miss the chance of fifth-year supper. Exactly, exclaimed Hermione. Food is one thing that cannot be changed by magic. Yeah, we know that, said Ron, his boredom at the conversation overriding his earlier urge to offer a shoulder to Harry. Yes, confirmed Hermione, the pitch of her voice rising sharply. We eat loads here, much more than muggles. So? Food can't be altered by magic, concluded Harry. Hermione nodded. Food is not transmutable. We need far more of it than moles do as energy for other things. For energy, for dash. Magic. Finished Harry, his own tone imitating Hermione's. Tell me how this is useful, said Ron, folding his arms. It's not in itself. Harry shook his head, but it helped me with this. That race. From her other pocket Hermione pulled out something Harry had only ever seen once before, and that was because it was his own. A DNA trace. And then, something else which Hermione had secreted between her jumper and t-shirt. A wand. It's Penrite's. Her old one at least. She thinks she lost it ages ago, but she can't use it, she's never been able to use it. But she's a witch, interjected Harry and Ron together. Hermione nodded. And so is Neville, and sometimes he has difficulty with spells. Potions. Magic. Mrs. Frobisher's letter seems to say that it depends on how much someone is a wizard, which can depend on the situation as well as the witch or wizard. Neville has the ability to be a really powerful wizard, but he had always felt second to his parents. It's a confidence thing. Maybe it's like that with Tabitha Penrite too. Harry read the letter again. This seems to say that. Hermione nodded as Harry trailed off into silence as he read the letter again. What? What does it say? Asked Ron, huffing in frustration, now truly lost. Harry? It says. It seems to say that my aunt Petunia has the ability to be a witch. Harry looked incredulously between Ron and Hermione. Mrs. Frobisher talks about her genetics. But no. It can't be true. Can it? Harry's beseeching look was heartbreaking, and it was all Hermione could do to prevent herself from offering shallow, meaningless comfort. She knew about Dementors, without you telling her. Mrs. Frobisher's never normally wrong. Why couldn't she be? Asked Ron, voicing Harry's thoughts, those he could not bring himself to express. He got to his feet and began to tread the floor angrily. Ron and Hermione exchanged looks. She's called me a freak all my life. There's no way. I'd know. Are you sure? Harry? Asked Hermione. You have to be sure, for your sake. But Harry shook his head. No. I don't care about all of this. No offense, Hermione, but most of this is academic. Sirius. Sirius told me not to take the potion. He told me that Mrs. Frobisher wouldn't want me to, and it would be an insult to her memory. But Harry shook his head as if refereeing an internal Quidditch match. It's to do with the universal link. She managed to work it all out. I think she'd want me to. He broke off and reached for his head. His mind was too full, his thoughts too tangled and confused as he sought to accommodate this new information. The Department of Mysteries, Hermione reminded him as Harry stopped pacing and slumped back down next to her. Okay, what do we know about it? It's mysterious, commented Ron unhelpfully. Both Hermione and Harry shot him a look. Penrite works there, said Hermione. You said that yourself. And there's two different types of people working there, unspeakables and mysteria. It's where the soul anyone who dies in the Ministry's custody goes to the Department of Mysteries, chipped in Ron. How do you know that? Asked Hermione hotly. How do you know everything you know? He retorted, looking from Hermione to Harry. Dad told me, added Ron, defensively. Then the trace must be on Mrs. Frobisher's soul, declared Hermione, joy and lightness expressed together. It wasn't me. Cowards! Shouted Harry. They must have got a piece of Cecilia Frobisher's soul from somewhere before showing it to the Dementor that caught her. It would have been straight there. Harry got to his feet, pacing around determinedly, as if something had just come to mind and he was trying to organize it again before hammering the door open. Where are you going? Asked Ron and Hermione, springing up together onto their feet. I've got to do it. That's where it's going to happen, and not just because of the prophecy. Of course. The prophecy. He looked between his friends, tinge of mania behind his excitement. The Horcrux. The one Dumbledore told us there's one to find, right? Hermione and Ron nodded synchronistically. It's at the Department of Mysteries. It has to be. It all fits. So? Ron put a hand on his shoulder, trying to steady his friend. You can't do anything about it now, not from here. At his words Harry burst into a wide grin, hugging his bemused friends. That's why I'm going to take the potion. Voldemort'll reappear there. Bet you every galleon you have. The Order'll be there and so will I. He nodded at Hermione and Ron again, continuing to smile. When the time comes, I'm going to take the potion that Snape's made for me. I'll have no powers and I'll have to say the unforgivable at the right moment. When I'll do, it'll be for all moles and wizards who've died under Voldemort's hand. I'll do it for Mrs. Frobisher's memory. 88,888,888. Sirius Black opened his front door. It was unusual for anyone to be calling nowadays. The Order generally used the pirated Floo network that the Ministry had yet to discover, but it must have been one of them. Dumbledore had only ever given the password to the Order. Unlatching 3 of the door fastenings before pulling on the handle, he looked upon the face of a ghost becoming saturated by the monsoon-like downpour. Cecilia Frobisher stood on his doorstep looking lost and bedraggled like a helpless kitten. "I'm so glad to have found you." Cecilia Frobisher threw her rain-drenched arms around an astonished Sirius Black, burying her head into his shoulder. Her breathing turned into racking sobs as she held herself against his shoulder. He was astonished she had found him, astonished and surprised, and he was kissing her tears away.